I want to build an application. I have this brilliant idea. What can I do? I don't want to tell anybody about it, but I want to work on it in my spare time, so I don't give it to my company. Oh, shit. I know. I'll use Drupal and a front-end framework to kind of make something that I might try out with my friends or whatever, and just put it together. That's exactly what I want to do. So, I actually want to help you guys do the same thing. Super Troopers is an example of awesomeness. My app's going to be awesome. Well, what can I build in a short time frame? Well, I decided to do that. I put a session in. I said, I'm going to build an app in 30 days from like conceptualness all the way to today after the approval process. And it was approximately 30 days. It's just like 3.5 weeks. So to start with, I had to have a plan. I said, okay, well, I'm going to build an application that someone at least at this conference can use, maybe, and I actually want it to function hopefully with Drupal. Drupal may not be the best solution for building a real-world application, but it's a good way to prototype what my ideas are. So I chose Drupal and Ember together. The reason I chose Ember is the way that the front-end framework is used. You can basically write plain HTML and then swap out content with a handlebars type concept, very similar to Twig. So, I'm familiar with both that concept. I will use those together. So for the Drupal side of things, I had to think of the structure, the content types, the taxonomy, the relationships of data, which we are all used to using, and hopefully, ideally, users. And how those reflect into an Ember situation of the data, the routes, how we build components, and the eventual user interactions with that. Now, we all love Drupal since this is a Drupal Summit. So let's take a look at what kind of structures that I actually did build that function in the application. So I built an application for this conference. I built a session scheduling application. It breaks down what sessions are on. And so then I said, okay, well, I'll group a date piece of content, and I will have a session piece of content, and then obviously a room, since we're in a room, and then those will have relationships to what level it is or what track it is. Hence the chart. So when I'm looking at it, what kind of contributed modules would I use? Well, Drupal has a huge spectrum of ways to do things, and we all know this. With Drupal 8, we have JSON coming out of the system, and that means we can use front-end frameworks, right? Not really. We all have to write custom serializers and all this kind of other stuff that we don't want to write. So I decided I'm going to make it as like basic, bare bones, no custom code other than maybe patches to modules that I could. So these are the 3 key modules that I use. And if you're using any front-end framework, you would want to ideally use for simplicity. So the REST UI, what that does is exposes the controls to what resources get output as get, post, etc. And you can say, like, oh, I want HAL JSON, or in this case, JSON API, and I want to have this permission for that kind of resource. You can do this all in configuration management, but for simplicity and also speed of it, I wanted to do it through UI. So REST UI. JSON API, which is a module that's hopefully going to be into core soon, is another module which I'll get to in the next page, next slide. And then cores. What cores does is something that Drupal actually has since 8.2, the ability to control how your cross-origin resource, something or other, is controlled. And so that's when you see like cross-site scripting errors in your console, cores is your solution. So these 3 modules, I would say, if you're going to whip together any kind of front-end application, should be on your radar. Why would I say JSON API instead of the JSON that comes out of Drupal? Because Drupal's JSON and JSON API are not at all the same thing. They output full JSON, but it doesn't follow any kind of standard that the rest of the world in the front-end framework world would follow. So JSON API is a specification of how you see here links that are a certain structure, data, certain structure, relationships, certain structure. Why would I want a certain structure? So that I don't have to control anything coming out of Drupal without any custom magic, as it were, I guess. And I know that any front-end framework that can take JSON API understands it, ideally, right? So then I said, okay, well, back to my, oh, I lost my connection there. Back to my next thought in this process, and this is still, really early in my development. I wanted to have awesomeness. I wanted to have that user interaction that you expect from an application, but from a JavaScript application. So I chose Ember. Now, a lot of you guys have probably worked with React, Angular, and other libraries. I chose Ember very much the same reason I chose Drupal. The community. Ember is a community-driven project as opposed to a corporately driven project like Facebook's React or Google's Angular. So to me, that was like a sense of like, oh, I can belong to a community. Again, all the decisions made by the core project are community-driven. So I reflected on that. So in the Ember application, I decided, okay, well, let's focus on how I'm going to take that data that I've decided to structure out into the Ember app. So I wanted to keep it super simple for the short time that I had, and I focused on two routes. We have the homepage route, which is the page that you visit, and the actual session information where you can see what the session's about. And then I broke it down into components. We have a session list, which is just a listing of sessions, the session individual item, and then I had some actions as an extra component. You may ask why I'm telling you all this stuff now, because right now is where we're going to be getting into the actual app. So I'm going to get you guys to go to that app. But in the Ember side of things, these are some of the key areas, library modules, add-ons, whatever you want to call it, that we use for Ember to connect with Drupal. So all the data is coming in through something called Ember Data, which is a core add-on. We have Ember Moment, which I use for the time. And then the Ember Data Drupal. This is the magicness kind of to connect Drupal's terrible naming conventions, which we're all used to, -- underscores, which JSON does not usually come in. And then for interactions, I use a local storage add-on. So for you guys that are interested, you can go to the app right now, and we can discuss this further. So it's Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit.surge.sh. Now, bear in mind, this is a free, non-database kind of host that's kind of slow, but so like the loading of the application takes a little bit longer, but you can go there. So we've seen a bunch of stuff, and I've talked about a bunch of modules and stuff. Well, why don't we take a look at the actual API server, and then we'll look at the app and see how simple it was. So I have a lot of tabs in this little tiny thing. So I'm logged into a vanilla. This is happens to be Drupal 8.3 dev for some other dependencies that I was working on. So let's go to the basic content structure that this application has. And since did you guys need that URL again? But it's, you guys can take a look at it right now and see how this is related. So the Surge app there. So when we look at this basic content structure, this is nothing custom about it. It's just, oh, sorry, just get rid of this. I broke it down into simple content types. We have a chat, which was something I was going to hopefully implement. the date, room session, and then user sessions. Another thing that I was hoping to implement, which I will talk about after as well. So my goal with this application was to have you, the audience, and people at the summit to be able to interact with the individual sessions and say, yes, one thing was I want to go to that session. Other thing was maybe I liked or didn't like that session. And the other thing was maybe I wanted to comment on that session. So I thought, okay, well, I will make a separate entry for the user-specific data and then relate it all to this stuff. So when we look at the date one, for example, I wanted to keep it simple. We have a date field, which is using a date range module, so we can have a time span. And I have just entity reference to my session. Simple, simple, right? When we look at the session, which is where the majority of the data will be, again, super simple. We don't see a title, obviously, but we have a body field, a level, which is a taxonomy, a room, which is an entity, a node, just a plain text for a speaker, and then a track, which is another taxonomy. This is common stuff that we build in normal Drupal stuff. It's just very basic relationships, nothing complex at this point. Trackpads, they are complex on the other hand. And then for rooms, we have a body field and a room number. Now, what I wanted to have is these are all related content. How am I going to have that relate on the Ember side? Quite easily, actually. I'll show you the taxonomy as well, just so you can see that there's no tricks up my sleeve. And in the taxonomy, I did do some little trickiness here. So on this level taxonomy here, I did include, oh my goodness, fails of Drupal. Actually, it was actually in the track part of me. I did include an extra field for class. And if you're using the application right now, going to on your tablet or your computer or on your phone, you'll see that the individual tracks have colors. And I use this class to do that. Keep it simple. So what we have here is a very basic Drupal output of data. Now, the Drupal JSON API module gives you endpoints for every piece of content that you have. This is a terrible use of screen real estate. So if you notice here, and this is an actual live API if you want to hit it up, Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit API small robot code. The JSON API node and then session, or if I change it to date or any other, say we'll say room, will function as an endpoint automatically by no configuration. That JSON API module just gives you this. And you can control it with normal permissions. But what you do have, this is not a great, you do have is a JSON API structure, like the standard structured list of data. So if we see here under this date, we have a relationship structured the same way as the JSON API spec, a unique ID, links, all that stuff for the data. So this is something we can work with. There are some tricks to it though, because there's still Drupalisms in how these things are labeled. This isn't a good session one's better for. Showing the Drupalisms here. You'll see here revision underscore timestamp, or let's go to the field underscore speaker. The JSON API spec does not like this, which I believe there is work on that. They like camel cased naming conventions for different things. So right now, without any configuration other than doing a content types and relationships, kind of coming up with a data structure, I've got myself a good API that I can work with in my application that I want to do in my spare time, which is what I've done. So I'm going to go to the application side of things. Sorry about this. And look at the Ember side of things, and like, how would I get that information properly into Ember without a lot of work? Well, Ember has a very much like Drupal, a set place for everything. So you'll see here we have adapters, controllers, helpers, models, routes, or roots, whatever you want to call it, serializers, storage, styles, and templates. That's a standard application structure. So when you add a model, for example, which is a way of pulling in data, it would go in the models folder, and it will automatically know when it builds that that's a model. So when we look at the output of this, the one to match the session, this is terrible on this little screen, sorry guys. This is what you get. So the Drupalisms kind of get removed because we're using that Drupal, Ember data Drupal add-on, which serializes the dashes and underscores for you. So you see here we got the same structure. We say like, oh, the title's a string, the body is just whatever, the speaker, track, room, and level. Same data we have on the Drupal side. So mocking this up is pretty easy. To get that relationships, Ember has its own kind of relationship structure, and we see here the belongs to way of doing it. And because our data isn't as controlled as maybe some other APIs might control it, we specify the reverse field that it's going to. So, and you see here I said it belongs to track, and then I'm doing that bidirectional reference, like for example in track here, by creating a not part of the data structure, a session, and then I say it belongs back to this field track. So I'm building that relationship with a simple one line. Ember knows what that means. So when I've built all my relationships, in this case, because I wanted everything sorted date-wise, I use the date object to build that key relationship. So everything in this date one goes down to session. And then from session, spreads out, just like I was showing in that chart. So I've built an Ember application. Let's go to the application. And you see here we have dates, registration, Saturday, all these little fancynesses. But how does that actually relate to each other in the sense of your data structure? How does this get to this point? Well, in the case of Ember, the way the models and the routes work, Ember is a route-driven framework. So, components can have data, but technically everything is resided in the URL structure, which for some applications is an issue, but for most it isn't. So, for example, on my index, in the route, I'm bringing in the date data store. So I'm saying, bring in that model, the date model, bring it in, and then in this case, I'm setting it as a controller so that I can use that in other places based on this model. And this RSVP function allows you to wait on other data to load. If I had other ones, it would kind of wait, like reserve spots almost. So now I've loaded this data, so we look at it on the actual index template, which I should turn wrapping on, I guess, hey? And you see there, I'm pulling in a component that I've created, that session list one I said, and I'm pulling the model of dates, and I'm calling it dates. Pretty straightforward, right? Not complex markup, nothing out of the hiddenness there. And so let's go into that session list component and see exactly the same. If that was already. So here, I'm doing the same thing, simple stuff. I'm doing it each, and I wrote a helper function to sort the dates by date instead of the output of the JSON. And then I'm opening it as date, and I basically output the simple format. So here I have a nice formatting of my time, which brings me to another issue with good old Drupal. So I'm formatting the time in time zones because time that comes out of Drupal, which is pretty standard for JSON, is UTC. Unlike standard JSON UTC standard format, Drupal's date does not have a time stamp of what the time zone is. So it doesn't say time zone Pacific time in the time. So if you're editing it on the Drupal side and you say, oh, it's at 9 o'clock, it thinks it's UTC time. Not. It even doesn't matter what your time zone is set at. That it calculates it as back to UTC time, which is great, but then we can't convert it back from that UTC time to your time zone because of no time zone specification. So there's one issue that I had with this. So for this demonstration, I just used UTC time as if it was the right time zone. But ideally, you would want to have the data coming out as the time zone. I can't even think what it's called. Like it's like a declarator kind of thing. What that means is you could technically do that with your own custom serializer from the Drupal side of things. But for this demonstration, I didn't want to have to do any custom coding at all on Drupal. I just wanted to output an API. My custom stuff was all done in, whether it's a view or it's just the content type and relationships, nothing else. So we'll see, we've got the date here, and that's what I'm sorting by. But then I'm pulling in a session, and you'll see here on my each statement, I say each date field sessions as a session. So what Ember has is the ability to look up relationships of data automatically based on that has many belongs to kind of relationship on that model. So I say, oh, look at the field session and look for the data that's attached to that. And I'm calling it its own session. So here on my next model, I'm saying, hey, I want to call that field session. I'm calling the data store session based on this session that I'm loading. So without any custom other funness, I'm now able to pull into that next object. So I was pulling the data from date, now I'm pulling it from session. Without another model. I only have one model one route call that's calling that one model of dates. I have those other models there for this data, but I don't have to build a string of by the parameter IDs and all that stuff. I don't have to build any of that stuff. So I'm saying, okay, and this is another feature, that scrolling kind of effect. I can pull in all the data. Here's my track. Again, data, if you notice here, the session field track and then field class, I'm now nested into that session's secondary level of data. For that, to track as a taxonomy. We have, the room number, which is another level deep without having to write any custom stuff. What is this giving me? It's giving me an application that's really quick to visualize and conceptualize, right? The idea of us decoupling Drupal is not just to build something that a customer wants, it's also for us to, try things. And that's exactly what I did here. And, goes deeper in breaking apart these different templates and stuff is how we would want to build up any kind of application is, stuff that's manageable chunks, right? All this data could technically be all on one index page, but manageability is gone. So what do I have here? I have an application that's, running. This is the application, and you guys can see this, and it stores my clicks into the local storage, so I can reload the page or change tabs. I said I wanted to create a culture learning, and I go to Pacific Northwest, and I can see that same liked button, but I'm not connecting to Drupal to do that. And this is where another challenge that I came up with was authentication with Drupal. I found that connecting this Ember application to connect to actually Drupal's user. I can pull down users and do all that stuff, but actually authenticating to it became a problem. It was on and off. So I decided, okay, well, how can I make an application that I don't want to have to push the data back up, and I just want to consume data and then actually show it. That's where I used local storage. And just like Drupal, how we can get things from an add-on, local storage is another add-on that I just, Ember install, Ember local storage, or whatever it's called. And I was able to do all this function with a couple lines of code. Now, I'm hoping you guys are actually trying this application out and not just looking at my screen of this application. But it makes you wonder, okay, well, I could have done this with the flag module and views and built this all really quickly, which is true. But because this is now on a, what do you call it, a thin, like pure HTML and JavaScript and CSS host, like this is a 2 megabyte package, and that includes like Font Awesome and Bootstrap. And the core of Ember and all my work for 2.8 megabytes or whatever it is when it's compressed when I deploy it. And I don't have to have any special hosting. I don't have to pay for any special hosting. Like I would just, I just have to run that command, surge domain, and it deploys to surge. So this is good for 3 things. A, cheap hosting, obviously. You can have multiple front ends for an application, so your scaling is I want to say cheaper. You're able to say, okay, well, I want to have my API on like a really robust server, or I want to distribute my API, and then I can have front ends in any kind of locale, multiple websites. It allows you to expand. And that's the whole idea of this decoupling. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to put on the same server and have a totally different front end and just to theme it. Like, what's the point of that, right? We're actually trying to make our lives easier or make better things. So this simple Ember application and my concept of 30 days, it took probably only about a week of true coding to build the whole application. So if we look at the Git repo here, so let's see when my initial commit was. So I did this on the 30th, so 26 days ago. And then you'll notice here there's like 9-day gap, 8-day gap, and then there's like a longer gap and long gap, and then like a lot more rapid kind of things as the date approached. Now, that's a good thing, because if that's typically how a project works, right? You kind of humming and hawing, you're trying things, and you're like, yeah, no, and then it's like, oh crap, we have a deadline, which is always a good thing, when I want to have this working by. And so like if you see here, yesterday's commits. Yesterday, I committed a bunch of things. I had like Friday night, I couldn't get the authentication to work properly. I was getting so frustrated. So I'm like, this is probably like midnight or after midnight. I'm like, okay, forget it. I'm going to do local storage to have something working, right? And then I still didn't have it perfect. So then I had to do a couple more things, and I was starting to go, okay, well, I had auth 0 instead of connected to Drupal's user base, and so we could still have you guys storing stuff. But all these commits, and then this morning I did a larger touch area. All these commits were to make an application that's decoupled in a rapid time frame, and in a simple way that technically anybody that has any sort of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Drupal experience can actually do. Not like, oh, I have to be an expert, or I have to download a manual that I have to go through before I actually figure this out. Because if you see here, this is just regular HTML with a few like ifs and elses, and like I have like that action, if it's liked, then show this HTML. If it's not liked, and I have a different class, and that's not hard to do. But then the result is something that is just a baby step to something bigger, right? You're like, okay, well, I could have built an Instagram application and done the same thing, you know? Use Drupal to push that image URL that I'm putting to a CDN and then have comments and I'm liking, and it's the same crap. But what we're doing is we're making it in a MVP, like it's a minimal product that can share with your coworkers, your friends, and make it so that you're the one that coming up with ideas instead of, you know, necessarily the client. Unless you guys are clients, and then I could do it for you. Just joking. That was a joke. But what we're getting at is like the idea of like Pattern Lab. If you guys read yesterday's Pattern Lab discussion, is that we can prototype and show something that's fairly close to functional to a client or to your teammates, or depending on if you're working on a product. That is the value that you're going to get with using a structure like this. So you can have a simple decoupling that will allow you to build that data structure, and in the end, maybe you're going to use like a better back-end framework that's maybe real-time. You're going to use Node or something to push data to your clients, or you're having multiple data sources or whatever. But to mock it, you're using something like this. So let me go back to the controls here. So, like in this Ember Drupal challenge, like what were some of the issues? And in this, for me, a lot of it was the content type naming conventions. At first, when I started this project, I used some example code and some help to kind of strip out those underscores and dashes and re-serialize it. Then I came into a wall. The way Ember handles relationships automatically gets eliminated. I would have to like call like another model with a parameter of the ID. And I'm like, well, that shouldn't be that hard. Like everything I read about Ember can do that automatically. Well, that was the big problem. Because as soon as you went into the relationship, Ember was looking for another camel-cased naming convention. So then, you know, I came across a project that it was someone in the Drupal community had created for Ember to fix that. What they did is they actually worked on the relationship thing. And before that, I actually got a lot of help from the Ember Slack community. Just like our Pacific Northwest, we have, you know, the Van Dugs and I'm sure Seattle and Portland and stuff. We have Slack communities, and there's the one for this conference. Just like Drupal's community, Ember has a strong community, and they were able to help me with trying different things to get to that. And then I found the Drupal project. We looked at the code, and it was like, hey, this is exactly what I need. I ran into huge walls with authentication. The way Drupal was wanting, it was saying it wasn't getting the authentication credentials, and I tried all these different ways. And I was at the time just using JSON Web Tokens. And looking into it, it might be better to use the simple OAuth module. But I just tried to do something that I'm familiar with in Drupal 7. Let's just try it. And I had kept on banging my head. And then that date time zone. For this application, because I wanted it to be time zone specific, and I didn't want to have to enter the wrong date time stamp into the database, I had to fake it because I wasn't getting the output that I wanted. But those are kind of minor issues, really, to build an application that is just a web page with some actions that doesn't need to be, festered on, right? The biggest thing was the naming conventions, but other than that, like those two things, I can work without it. Do you have some questions? And I can go through some more of the application for you. Yes. You want me to answer that? So the reason for doing that was I didn't want to replicate data. So the idea of dry coding and everything, same thing with data, right? So because there is one time for all these sessions at a time, right? So from 9:30 till 10:30, 10:30 to 11, there's certain things. I said, well, why am I going to enter that data in every session? Why don't I enter it once and either I could relate that date field to that session, so it's grouping it by itself. That's the reason I chose it. At first, when I did that, I did create individual date fields, and then I was like, why am I entering the same time for 4 sessions every time? It's just a wasted experience, right? And then at the same time, at the date, as it being a separate entity and related, I can say, well, maybe I want to add an option so that the date is a global date where it's like, the lunch. It goes across all the sessions as opposed to, or all the tracks as opposed to it just being at one specific entry and having 4 like to go across the counter kind of thing, right? That makes sense?
Yeah. I wanted to ask, if you wanted to build something that took advantage of other Drupal capabilities like multilingual, how would you envision a solution in Ember rolling out?
So for Ember and multilingual, there are, same as Drupal is, there's projects like I18N and that kind of stuff. And you would pull in different JSON feeds based on the language. And then you would use the API. And it would be the same as any kind of framework. You would differentiate each language and then have it. So.
Do you think you can connect with Drupal to pull the language content out?
Yeah, I believe in the JSON API there is a language specificator. Just let me. So basically, what the Drupal module that I'm using to pull out the data, in which a lot of the projects like React, Angular, I believe Angular 2, and Ember's is JSON API. So this specification is, you don't have to do anything. You just say it's a JSON API, and it will know exactly the specification. And there should be a language. I don't know what I would put. I'm sure there is a language specification of where it would sit, and it could be a top level.
Yeah. We're doing something similar to Angular applicants and Drupal 7 backend, and we have different feeds for different languages. That means when you switch languages, like if you want to run it offline on the local store, you kind of need to download them all. So we went from Arabic to English, or from Turkish to English to Farsi to Arabic, and we want to have all of that stuff in the local store. So we made, right now we're doing what you described, but I think we might also think about putting all these things together into one payload.
Yeah, you would say like maybe there's a body for English and a body for Farsi or whatever, yeah. Right. And that's data structuring, right? Depending on the complexity of the application, or there's people that spend their whole lives just doing that, right? So, but as far as I know, Drupal will still output so that node type and then / language kind of thing.
How much of your time was spent on the Drupal side versus the Ember side?
So I can break down my time in this is how it was. Then most of it was like, okay, well, I'm going to come up with what can I build in a short amount of time that I don't have to do a lot of learning on, because I don't know Ember enough to be an expert. I'm learning Ember, and it's I'm getting more excited. Just like when you learn Drupal, it's like, oh, that's really cool. It does that out of the box, or with a simple add-on, it does what I can envisioned I can do. And when I compare it to other libraries, it's like the markups either really messy or things that I'm not comfortable with. So what I try to do is like, okay, well, I'm going to build an application that does way more than I did. And so I started, like, if you looked at my content types, I had the chat, and then I had the user sessions, and I actually had another one which I was going to track where you are in the building. If you like, kind of like I can't think of the application where it's like I'm checking in here, and I was going to use D3 to kind of make it so that it would show that a lot of people are at this room, and it would kind of like, oh, there's a lot of people in this session. And then at the same time, I was going to track all that data so that we could show maybe as stats. And I had built that into my application. I might have stripped it out to clean it up for deploying, but I did have like this venues area here, this map. And my plan was to use the map to show hotspots kind of thing. of where you are, and you could just like touch the map and say I'm here, and then it would like. Because okay, oh that's my plan, but it all bases around the session kind of data. So I'm like, okay, well I'll start with the session structures first, and initially just like the gentleman up top talked about the date, I had the date on the session, and I was looking at the output and the data entry, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, why am I entering this data so many times? I would not normally want to consider a client to do that. I don't want to have to enter my date so many times. Also, there's a chance of error, right? I enter the date and I accidentally choose the wrong date, or I put the wrong time zone, or whatever, right? So eliminating error by simplifying data entry process. So that's how I basically spent probably 2 hours maybe building that data structure, and then like going back. And that's something else I wanted to mention. So standard with Ember, and I don't know about others, the way the JSON API spec suggests is like you would have one session model that has multiple sessions. So the model name should be session, not plural. Always, and plural would be done on the coding side of things. You would say like, oh, I'm pulling in sessions, plural, but it's actually pulling one session at a time, right? So I had an error with a relationship, and it was, I think I called it sessions in one of my fields. I said like field sessions because it was like, to me, it was relating multiple times. And then I reached out to the Ember community and the data, and they were saying, oh, you have to be naming it field session. Like it's plural is like a thing that you do when you have multiple instances of that data. So that was the only thing I had to go back and change in Drupal, just the field machine name. But other than that, it was the same. Like Drupal was actually pretty quick to do. I didn't have to choose a theme. I didn't have to do any of that stuff. In reality, like I spent probably, I want to say 20 to 25 hours on the project total, because I have 2 children, I have a wife. These are all things that are outside of work that need attention. Then I have work and, you know, sleeping and eating and all the other crap. So those all took up way more time than obviously the application in that 30 days. If I was working as a shop where I could say, okay, well, I'm going to give a developer a week or 2 to do this, the application level would be a lot farther along, right? I used Bootstrap and just some like simple CSS just to get some styling, and those colors are based on the colors from the actual site, so that the track colors are the same, just a little bit different.
How problematic do you think it would be to surpass the issue of authentication?
So, you know, I would try with a JWT module, and there are lots of issues in that module. For a while, it was maintained, and then it's being maintained, and then it's on GitHub. The developer that's building the JSON API module is also building a simple OAuth module. I believe he's works for Lullabot. It's like episode without the P in his username. The simple OAuth module is the same kind of concept. I had it set up on another project that I'm building. I haven't got to the user authentication part, so I haven't, tried that yet. But that was my next choice. Auth0, which was another choice, is a third-party authenticator, and it works with Drupal out of the box as well. And you can have it use a single sign-on kind of approach, so you can use Drupal's users and then pull it back and forth. Again, I haven't tried it further than like you saw yesterday. I committed some changes and I was going to do it, and then last night, I had actual family things to do, and so finishing some slides. Literally, that's how little time that I spent on it to get it to this level. And I think that's what the challenge was. It wasn't like, oh, build an Ember application and Drupal and show us. It's build an Ember application, coming up with the concept from the time that the session is approved, and that's the challenge. So you have this idea comes in your head, you're like, oh, that would be a cool application. I'll do it some other time. And I saw this Twitter meme. It's like this guy with a skateboard running, and he's like ready to jump on the skateboard, but never commits. What I'm trying to help you guys do is say, and you've got yourself something that you can say, okay, look at, this is my proof of concept in, maybe you're like, this actually sucks. Like no one would want to use this. Or maybe it's cool enough that you're like, hey, maybe I'm going to work on it some more. And if you build it in that structure that's easy to build first, then you're like, okay, well now I want to make it a production ready thing. Maybe Drupal is not the best API. Like I would look at like Phoenix Elixir, something that can handle a lot of connections and can do real time, or Meteor, or some other, roll your own, or Rails, or something that may be better for real time communications, or something that can handle the scaling better. Because right now Drupal 8 is thought process of like we want to be a good API. Doesn't necessarily mean it's been an API as a server for a long time. Like I don't need to load a front end to run it as an API. I just want it running and sending that data out. It all depends on your application. Any other questions? Am I boring? Sorry. In the back, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed you had the class stack bookmark there, and I saw Ed Faulkner briefly with you last night. Have you done any investigation of using Ember to progressively enhance Drupal's native sort of output?
So I was at DrupalCon where Ed demonstrated, and for you guys that weren't there, there's actually a video from DrupalCon. Was that Los Angeles? Or no, it was New Orleans. I don't remember. Where he took Drupal's .com site, which nobody really uses, and put a module in it. So basically doing the whole decoupled blocks kind of concept, where you can use Drupal for some of it, and Ember or Angular or something else as another part of it. And in the demonstration, Ed Faulkner, who's one of the core contributors in Ember, took the site and did. Let's go back to the application here. Oh, it's too many clicks. He did this effect here with one of the objects, and it's like when you click on it, and this window's too small to see it, it moved to the, and he used like a pan action. So like the title and the block scaled and slid over, right? What that did for a lot of the people in the audience was blow their mind, because this is something that we see like page load, you're on the next page. That interaction of going back and forth between pages and not seeing like a full page load had impressed a lot of people. And I have to say, like, we get siloed or complacent with how things work. When we work with PHP and we see something, and this is how it works for this many years, when you see something like, hey, this page didn't load and it didn't take any time to switch between that route, like it impresses you, right? Well, what Ed has worked with he's worked with some of the other people in the Drupal community, and like I've talked to him on the Ember Slack chat. He's very helpful in helping you work with Drupal. He's on his own GitHub page. He's got some helper modules that he's built as examples to help you connect Drupal as a partial kind of semi-decoupled approach. That was his kind of thing. It's like you can move into Ember partially. Like you don't have to necessarily use the router for everything, or use the router for certain parts of your site and then use Drupal's router for the other parts. And it's pretty cool. If you guys can, maybe it's New Orleans, but look up his talk. It's in the New Horizons track at the conference. In the video, it's phenomenal. You'll like seriously be impressed. Did you have anything more? Sorry,
I was just curious if you've done any progressive enhancements.
Yeah, like for myself, like in the clients that I've been typically working with, right now they're still in that same structure. My concept of this application was actually to push myself to build something. And I've been tinkering with an application that I've been puttering on for a few years now, and like it's a SaaS, and I've changed approaches on it. And this to me was like a way to light my fire and say, okay, well, I'm just going to get it to work, and then I'll take my learnings and apply them. And all this code for all this application, which is not a lot, is all open source as well. I was going to featureize all the settings, or I could dump the whole settings config, except for some of it probably to do with keys and such, onto that GitHub repo for the API server as well. So you can see you could install the whole Drupal site, install the Ember app, and just run it. And if you're curious how easy it is to run an Ember application, so let's get into the, so I'm on my local, and I can just go Ember S for serve, and it will build my local environment. And like out of the box, I have the exact same thing. It's pulling the data down, and I didn't have to do anything. And I can change things, add components and such, and like do that kind of auto loading, real time kind of stuff. So like it makes it easier. So you can just pull down my app, load it, and I left the API on there. It's not using any authentication. It's unfortunately an open API because I couldn't get the authentication part working. But it's not allowing you to send data up. But you can do this, run this whole application on your own computer and test it out, play with it, right? Did you guys want to see that URL for the GitHub repo again? Too bad. I did actually in the Slack channel for this session. There it is pinned to the Slack channel. But there it is in case you guys want to. Yes.
Did you do anything like on the caching side?
Nothing. So like that said, like if you notice, like sometimes the app will take a little bit longer to load. I have done nothing. It's straight out of the box. Like there's not even Drupal caching turned on. Like I wanted to say this is exactly how you would be, like just vanilla. I want to make something and not worry about performance. Not worry about anything about that, because that's stuff that everybody's going to deal with at some time or another. But really, I didn't have time. Like my life and my work and everything else took more of that time than me sitting. You know, I'm not young and just work till 3 a.m. every day. I can't do that. I could, but I wouldn't be married very much longer. Yes.
If you wanted to have a domain and serve this thing like a normal, website that you want, you're going to serve what's currently coming from the search the URL that you gave us. But you still want it up. In other words, if you want to one domain, both Drupal backend, if you will, and the Ember frontend. How would you do that?
Well, you couldn't technically use the same domain because, like, Drupal has an index.php would take over the index of this file. It doesn't like your host. You'd have to have it a subdomain, like so maybe your API dot, and then your parent. And technically, they're just different folders on Apache, right? This is not running on, like, the app is not running on Node or anything. It's literally an HTML file. Like if we look here, in the dist folder, which is like the where it's built up. Sorry. Oh, there we go. So this is the site. We have your content and it's side loading. Actually, I can rebuild it for you. It probably just deployed the. My trackpad's dying. Like, so Ember has its own build tools, test tools, and stuff built into it. So I'm just building it for production. It minifies it, and builds it out for you. There's a hack for surge.sh to change the HTML to 200.html. But you can see here, let's see if I can get this terminal output bigger. So we have the assets here, like this is the application and like the gzip, and this is like Ember core, this is the actual application code, and these are the third-party libraries. So we have a 313 kilobyte and 119 byte. So this is the icons I'm using, and this is Bootstrap. So like that's all the files in the whole package, and obviously it ungzips them to send that load. Like you could probably compress that even further and do other kind of tech tricks, but you only have 4 files in the HTML file to upload All the JavaScript, everything's all gzipped in there. And then the assets, like your image assets and such, are in a separate folder. Those don't get compressed. So like you technically get to host it anywhere you want. You could put it on the same folder, but just the way PHP and Apache and everything work, you have to have, like it couldn't be in literally the same folder on your server because, the PHP of the Drupal would take over the Ember apps index. But yeah, it can be on the same machine. It's not a big deal. I did it for deploying purposes and demonstration purposes. If you want, I could deploy it to another domain as well. So let's do that right now quickly. I had a lot of stuff in the cache, so I don't have to like forget my commands and be like screwing it up on live demos. So this copying it to 200, that's like some sort of hack for Surge. So here, we'll do it to another one. This is going to be Drupal demo. And once that's done uploading, you guys can go there, drupaldemo.surge.sh. Now that same site is deployed to another server. At the same time as the other server. So now I've scaled it. Essentially, right?
From SEO perspective, search engine now is going to index the Drupal content, is also going to index multiple applications. Okay, duplicate. Sometimes maybe you run multiple applications. You coming from the same content from Drupal side, right? So
sure.
Just wondering, like, how do you deal with the SEO stuff? Do you have to in the raw text, like at the Drupal side, you have to disallow the search engine?
So the Drupal side wouldn't see the search engine at all.
So you have to disable, like,
It's-
disallow.
Yeah, like basically in this case, in any decoupled case, Drupal is not a front end. So you don't see, site visitors aren't going to Drupal. Drupal could be used as a content entry point or its data management tool, whatever, right? And like my thought of Drupal is like you have user management, roles, and you have complex data structures that you can do without having to think, oh, like how do I properly set this field to be the right type? I want to make a simple Boolean. Sure, I can make it a Boolean, but I want to make it have different things or different keys. When you start writing it, your own API structure, it gets more complex. So the front end here, which is what you would search through, and like application doesn't have to be a website. It could be a mobile app. We're using like Cordova or some other kind of tool to output it, or you can use the thing that Adam uses. I can't think of it. The Electron. Serving an HTML thing in an application and just pulling the data down. Now it's a native application on your computer with a web application running inside it. SEO isn't necessarily what you're looking at, but anything you do in SEO would be the same as if you wrote regular HTML. If you wanted to put meta tags on something, you would have a field of meta tags and you could pull that down, add the meta information. There's lots of information on how to do that with a JavaScript front end. The other thing you would want to do if you're doing a true SEO you would want to actually have static generated HTML and CSS JavaScript that are pulling in like what's it called? Server-side rendering. So in Ember's case, they call it fast boot, which is it uses Node.js, pulls in some data, and it will load data for bots and such behind the scenes, and then when you visit the page, it will load that data like really fast, as if it's static HTML. And then, if there's changes to that data, it will update that data after it's loaded. But like SEO it's different. Like you wouldn't use Drupal's. You wouldn't think of like, oh, I got to put Google. You could maybe put the Google Analytics code in the Drupal side of things, and then you have to pull that in through the API to do it. You may as well just do it on the Ember side of things.
So with the REST stuff on the Drupal side, you said you had problems with authentication, and if you got over that, can you like write
rest, so can you write back into Drupal?
Yes.
Okay.
I could technically do that now, and I was doing that in another local API that I set up. But the issue is like I'm building it for this demo. I want to have the API open so you guys could like pull it and test it. But that's why I didn't expose. I'm not going to just like, oh, I'll have an open API and people can just write to it.
There's no problem.
Yeah, no, it's be a man, do the right thing. Yeah, it's super simple. In Ember's case, it's like .save, and then there's update and all sorts of nice functions for that. But it's the same as any kind of endpoint, like any REST, CRUD operations. It could be Drupal, it could be anything. It's all permissions based. And Drupal 8.3 has changed some things from Drupal 8.2.6 in the way permissions are output. And so there used to be permissions on when you enabled RESTful web services that had like what role can put, what role can get, all that stuff, and that's now been removed. But BC won't be completely removed. It's like kind of the interface is removed in 8.3, or I don't know if anybody else knows what specific version it was removed from, but supposedly it's just going to use the actual permissions table instead of the specific ones for REST. So if you say anonymous people can write X piece of content, it will allow it over REST as well. Any other complaints or ideas or suggestions? I was waiting for them, but I just like... And like really, guys, I hope like this talk was not me telling you what to do. I'm hoping to inspire you guys to say like, hey, we can build something quickly and easily without a ton of custom code and using community solutions. In this case for Drupal, I have literally 3 core modules that are not core, but key modules that are enabling me to do this work. And then Ember, any tutorial of like, oh, how do I make local storage? And it's like this add-on and this little snippet of code and bada bing, bada boom, right? Like, and you can take a look at my code. But for example, that my actions for those, that little like button, this is my actions. When we go to the actual component, this is all I'm doing. So I'm saying like, get the storage from my local storage. I am saying this is the storage for my likes, which I already have set up a local storage for, like with no real markup. Then I say, oh, is it liked already? I'm checking the length. Yes, and it's based on that ID. And then my actions are like, oh, toggle like, and it's if it's liked, if it's not liked. Literally easy peasy. How many lines of code is that with nice spacing? 20 lines of code with some spaces and stuff. And most of it's like, oh, just simple like imports and stuff. It's not hard. But in the result is something that you can tangibly see, and you guys can say, hey, it works, right? I can change tabs and it's there still. And literally yesterday, I had it on session storage, and then I forgot that local storage is persistent across tabs. So I just switched it. And to do that, in this case, was in my storage. I literally just changed my array from session to local. Like that's just like Drupal, but now it's in another framework. We're using community packages, community-driven product. Cool.